Hi, I am Brittany Shostad, and my presentation is on domestic violence and the psychological impacts that it has with it. So, according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence is the intentional physical assault, intimidation, battery, sexual assault, and/or use of other threatening behavior by one member of a household against another. And I did add my citation down at the bottom. Other less obvious forms of abusive behavior include stalking, the use of threatening looks or gestures, attempts to control the reproductive health of an intimate partner, and displays of psychological aggression. Psychological abuse involves trauma to the victim caused by verbal abuse, acts, threats of acts, or coercive tactics. Perpetrators of psychological abuse to control, terrorize, and denigrate their victims. It frequently occurs prior or concurrently with physical or sexual abuse. And again, I did put my citation down at the bottom there. Physical abuse includes humiliating the victim, controlling what the victim can or cannot do, withholding information from the victim, deliberately doing something to make the victim feel diminished or embarrassed, isolating the victim from friends and or family, denying the victim access to money or other basic resources, stalking, demeaning the victim in public or in private, undermining the victim's confidence and or sense of self-worth, and convincing the victim that they are crazy. There are other ways of doing this as well, obviously. These are just the top ones that I found. Psychological abuse also increases the trauma of physical and sexual abuse, and it causes long-term mental health damage. Warning signs of a victim. If you are wondering if somebody that you know or somebody you encounter may be the victim of abuse, some of the warning signs to look for: bruises, baggy clothing or uncharacteristic clothing for the weather. So if it's 95 degrees outside and they're wearing sweatpants and long sleeve shirts or a turtleneck and scarves, that may be them hiding something. Depression in a naturally cheery person that may be a sudden onset. Anxiety. Social withdrawal. Whether it be from friends or family or just natural activities. Social withdrawal is a huge cue. Low self-esteem. A partner who insults them in front of other people. Seem constantly worried about angering their partner, whether their partner is there or not. Make excuses for their partner's behavior, that they're just having a bad day, or they're moody right now, or something else is going on, but constantly making excuses for why their partner is behaving that way. Unexplained accidents or trips to the emergency room, but always having a reason that they tripped over something or they fell down the stairs, and not wanting to talk to cops, not wanting to spend extra time in the doctor's office, those sorts of things. Excessive drugs or alcohol for somebody who usually doesn't drink or somebody who's never done drugs. could be the signs of them wanting to cover up the depression, cover up the abuse. Loss of interest in their daily activities. So my story, at 18 years old, this was my ex. At 18 years old, I graduated high school at 17. I didn't turn 18 until after I would have started college. And I was working 3 jobs and not spending very much time at home. I didn't have a very good home life and relationships. So I was just working 3 jobs, spending time with friends, and through mutual friends, I met this person. It was the first relationship I had that wasn't, a high school boyfriend and wasn't really anything serious. And it was the first person that I thought that I, was in love with and could spend time with, and that I thought was interested in me for me. And I was obviously at a really vulnerable time. I was no longer in school and I was paying my own bills and doing my own thing, and I was 18 and he was over 21, and kind of the shock and awe factor and all of that. And so it was, I was living in Aurora and he was living in Longmont, and because of some prior issues with law enforcement and stuff like that, he didn't have a driver's license at the time. So I soon found myself driving back and forth to Longmont twice a day and taking him to work and picking him up from work and spending all my time doing whatever he asked. And I didn't think twice about it and the warning signs that should have gone off to begin with. I just, I was 18 and I was young and I was naive and thought that that's how every relationship should be, and didn't realize that there was no give and take. It was just all me giving and him taking. There was no reciprocation. And so so that was 2006. And in the fall of 2006, I turned 19 and we started talking about moving in together, and we were getting everything in order for that. And around the holidays in 2006, my mom ended up having to have emergency surgery, and my parents were still kind of on the fence about whether or not to, they liked him and how everything was. Well, he was a smooth talker. He had everybody fooled. And so he said, well, hey, why don't I just move in with you guys and help around the house because your mom can't work or anything right now. So he moved in with my parents and I, and it was the spring of 2007 before we moved out on our own. Well, it took me a while to realize in the spring of 2007 and into the summer of 2007 that once he got me moved out on my own is when his true colors started showing. And the more time we spent around nobody, the more possessive he got and the more lies I caught him in. And every time I caught him in a lie, he would throw it back on me and ask if I was cheating and what I was doing, and he would go through my phone. And the psychological abuse started in really, really hardcore. And that fall, I actually got hurt at work and got laid off. And when I was no longer making money, he decided that because I was home all day, I was cheating and there was stuff going on, and I decided that it wasn't a good situation, and I decided that I was going to leave. Well, I tried to move back to my parents' house, and lo and behold, he had everybody so fooled that he had my parents in his pocket. And so I found myself going into winter, and I didn't have friends. He had isolated me from all of my friends. He had isolated me from all of my family. He had broken off all of those relationships, and from all of the abuse and making me question myself and question who I was and whether or not I was good enough for anything and all of that, I turned to somebody that I had known from growing up, but I knew wasn't the best person, but the only person that I still had in my life. And I wound up in an even worse situation and wound up in a quickie marriage at 20 years old and ended up getting it annulled just as fast, just after New Year's. But, just after New Year's, I ended up running to my parents, and it was actually this person who talked my parents into letting me come back home. And so there he was, the rescuer, right? And so I found myself back in that situation again. And so in 2008, I ended up moving back into an apartment with him again. And he spent no time at all throwing it back in my face that I couldn't do it without him. And in early 2008, the physical abuse started, and it tied right in with that emotional abuse. And from 2008 to when we finally split just after my 22nd birthday in the fall of 2009, it got really bad. I spent several trips in and out of the ER, and he completely cut me off from my family because we moved up to Arvada and they were all the way in Aurora, and made my family think that I was the one who didn't want to see them. And I had no friends, and I had started a new job, and he showed up at my new job and accused one of my bosses of something, and I ended up getting fired. And it was a really, really tough three and a half years. I was living a lie. These pictures, we look happy. He was really good at putting on a show in public, and I was scared to leave. I had nowhere else to go. He had everyone else fooled. It wasn't until we went out for my 22nd birthday, and my family came up to go to dinner with me, and things got really bad, and we got into a really, really, really bad fight. And somehow I pocket dialed my sister's cell phone, and my mom and my sister and my sister-in-law listened on the phone and got in the car and drove across town and listened on the phone as he screamed and yelled and cussed and hit me. And it wasn't until then that they finally believed me that he was abusive. And so then in September, when we went to separate stuff and leave the apartment, he actually showed up one day that he wasn't supposed to be there. We were supposed to get our stuff out individually. And that night I went to the ER with 2 broken ribs. And that was a major turning point for me, that I wasn't going to let anybody treat me like that ever again. But unfortunately, that sent me down a really bad rabbit hole, and I was very defensive in every relationship after that. And it was really hard to recover from it. So the repercussions and the healing, and I find myself very lucky because there's so many people out there that go through way worse than what I went through, and I know how hard, and there's still days that I deal with the depression from it and issues from it. So, but counseling, I spent over 2 years in and out of counseling, not just because of this situation, because of things through my childhood and everything else, but I spent over 2 years in and out of counseling, trying to rebuild family relationships. There's a lot to be said for that, and not just on my part, but my parents felt really bad that they didn't see or believe how bad things really were, and that in the time that I wasn't living with them, that they were having him over for dinner and they were still seeing him and spending time with him, and that they were just as fooled by his act as I was in the beginning and as everybody else has been. And making new friends. I was 22 years old. I, hadn't gone to college, so I didn't build any of those friendships or do any drinking or go out or any of that. So 22 years old, that's what I did. And in one of my previous papers and discussion posts, I talked about a group of friends that I made at the bar that became a core friendship group for me. And it's true that it took a lot for me to move past that and trust people. And yes, I made a lot of bad decisions too, but it took a lot for me to even get back to being able to want to dance or go out or do anything. So I spent a lot of time drinking, and which wasn't the best decision, but it was hard. I switched jobs a lot and was trying to get my footing back and trying to figure out how to be stable. I dealt with a lot of depression, and now as an adult, especially with fibromyalgia, I still battle with depression. But I dealt with a lot of depression. And then I moved out with a friend of mine who lived downtown to try and regain some of my independence. The only time I had lived not with my parents was with him, really. And so I wanted some of that independence and pay my own bills and do my own thing. And I actually found him stalking me. At one point, he showed up at a bar that her and I were at with a big group of our friends, and he followed me and pulled out a knife. And one of the tattoos that I have, and the reason why I have it placed where I have it placed, is because he left a scar on my arm where he cut my arm with a knife. I had to file a restraining order, and I've run into him a few times in random places here or there since, and luckily there hasn't been an issue those times, but I still find myself looking over my shoulder if there's a chance that I could run into him. And we're how many years later now, and there's been times I've sworn that I have seen him drive by, and it makes me shudder. The hardest psychological damage to heal for me if it'll pull up, was dating. Dating was the hardest. I had my fair share of bad choices and short-term relations. I, had some one-night stands. I had some 2-3 week relationships. I had, I seemed to be drawn to the same type of men. I was engaged, and he ended up cheating on me. My daughter's father ended up cheating and was a liar. And every relationship that I was in seemed to be full of lying and cheating and distrust and some form of psychological abuse, and that seemed to be all I knew and all I could find, and I couldn't seem to get out of that cycle. And my daughter was born in February of 2012, and I chose to do it on my own. And a close friend of mine said, I know that you're prepared to do this on your own, but you don't have to. And so he actually signed me up for an online dating website called eHarmony, and he paid for it and said, go on and fill out a profile. And I was not convinced that it was going to work. I was not convinced that there was anything to it. I was so mad at my friend for what I thought for sure was going to be wasting his money. And, it was about a month into it, and I had talked to a couple people, nothing had come of it. And I started messaging with a guy, and it's set up where it's like certain questions and then like multiple questions, and then you can open email, and then you can choose to send phone numbers if you want to. So it's set up in a specific format. And we had got to the point where we had exchanged phone numbers, but we hadn't met. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll meet this guy. We'll see where it goes. And the nice thing about it is that he knew about Elise, and so it's like, I'm still prepared to do this by myself, even if it's 18 or 25 years or however long she's going to live with me, but we'll see what happens. So in 2013, I entered what my husband and I jokingly, but in all seriousness, call my retraining period. And so my husband, Kevin, and I started dating in March of 2013. And it has been the most amazing time of my life since. But not without its fair share of complications. And when I say that, I mean not what you think when you think about a marriage and complications, because in true honesty, we rarely fight. But I expected that every disagreement would be a screaming match, would be throwing things, would be him demeaning me, would be him trying to hit me, would be him slamming doors. That's all I was used to. Even my parents, when they got into an argument, like my mom would throw things across the room, or she would pull my sister and I out of school early and leave with us for the weekend, and my dad didn't know where we were. Like, that's just all I was ever used to. And so it made me so mad. The first couple times we got into just a disagreement about something, because he knew my past, because we were open and honest from the very beginning, And he understood my past, and he understood those reservations that I had, and that I was holding on to some of that, and how hard it would be for me to let go and trust. He literally would look at me and start laughing. And at first, I would get so upset because I was ready to like brawl and scream and like defend myself and put up this wall. And he literally had to retrain me that you can have an adult conversation with your spouse and it can be a disagreement, but you can have an adult conversation without raising your voice, without getting into a fight, and that you can say it lovingly, that it's okay to have a difference of opinion, that it's okay to disagree, and more importantly, it's okay to accept each other for those disagreements. And so he actually watched me getting this prepared, and laughed at me when he saw this retraining slide, because he said, you know, I'm still retraining you. It's however many years later, and I'm still retraining you. And it's true. There's times that I catch myself going down that spiral, especially when my family's involved, because that's the way they were. And it's a difference in how him and I were raised. His family is very much, they talk about everything, they see very logically about things, and my family is yell and scream and be petty about stuff. And so maybe that's the reason why I was drawn to those types of people. But so he will still, if he sees me going down that cycle, he will either tell me that I'm being stupid, or he'll start laughing at me. And he says it or does it with all the love in his heart. But I still to this day have to catch myself. I am still dealing with the psychological repercussions of what I was put through. And I still look down and have physical scars of what I was put through. And, you know, if I get a really bad head cold and I start coughing and I have it for more than a couple of days, my ribs still hurt from where they were broken. And I will never be fully healed from my past. But you know, our past makes us who we are, and I'm stronger because of what I went through. But it makes me very, very aware of what's going on around me. And for that reason, my husband and I are very, very conscious about, you know, we don't argue in front of our kids. And we try really hard not to yell in front of the kids. And if anybody in my family is doing those sorts of things, we try to keep our kids away from that situation, because we want our kids to know how love feels. So if they're ever in a situation where they don't feel that, they get a red flag. Because I didn't have those red flags when I should have. And I think a lot of that is because I was raised in an environment where a lot of those things were going on all the time. And so it was normal for me, and it shouldn't have been. So I am grateful every day for the family that I have, and it could have been a whole lot worse. And I should have walked away a lot sooner. But it's hard, because I know that I had true feelings for more than just that relationship, but some of the others after. And it's hard to walk away from them even when there are bad things going on. And that's the biggest question is, well, why did she stay if she was being abused? because you can't help who you fall in love with. And if there is love there, it's really hard to walk away. It is really, really, really hard to walk away, especially when you don't have somewhere else to go. And there weren't kids involved. Now, when my daughter was involved, I didn't hesitate to walk away because it wasn't about me. So, anyway, that's my presentation.